please allow me to hand over to our partner organizations leaders, to Victoria Manco and Fausta Pakar. You know you can find their bios in English and Russian on the website of our center. Victoria, over to you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Victoria Manco. I'm Director General of the International and Comparative Law Research Center. Today we are holding a presentation of the Russian version of the manual integrating gender perspectives into international operations. I'd like to say that mainstreaming gender perspectives is one of the most relevant matters today that enjoys a lot of focus today. And as you know, in the year of 2002, the 29th of May was declared the day of UN peacekeepers. And because of the UN Security Council resolution on women, peace and security, we find it most important at our level to facilitate the broadest coverage of such problems among the community at large, because it is our shared responsibility and our common future. Before we turn to the topic of our event, I'd like to say a couple of words about our center. Today, our center is one of the leading legal think tanks in Russia. And we have not only a broad spectrum of various research under our belt, but recognition among our colleagues. Last year, we acquired the status of an observer with 3 UN commissions on international trade law. And we keep implementing and improving such important initiatives as the International Public Law Summer School and also awards for research in international public law. One of the key areas of our activities is development and maintaining of cooperation with our foreign colleagues. And in this connection, I cannot but highlight that our today's event is not the first one that we hold together with the International Institute of Humanitarian Law. Last October, we held a workshop in San Remo on international humanitarian law and international human rights law in armed conflicts. This year, because of COVID-19 related restrictions, we are holding an online session, but I do hope that next year we'll be able to get together in Moscow at our center. In conclusion, I'd like to extend my special thanks to Bakhtiyar Tuzmuhamedov for his invaluable assistance in organizing our today's event. Colleagues, I thank you very much and wish all of us a fruitful and exciting discussion. And please allow me to hand over to Fausta Pakar. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon to everybody. It is indeed for me a great pleasure to take the floor on behalf of the International Institute of Humanitarian Law in San Remo on this presentation of the Russian version of the Handbook on integrating gender perspectives into international operations. And I would like to express my deep gratitude to the International and Comparative Law Research Center and its Director General, Victoria Mango, for hosting and organizing this event today. My thanks also go to my friend Bakhtiyar Tuzmuhamedov, member of the Council of the San Remo Institute, who took the initiative of this presentation and constantly followed this scientific preparation of it. My gratitude is even greater to the organizers for having scheduled this event today, on the Day of Human Rights, when the Universal Declaration was adopted in 1948 by the General Assembly. Without stressing all the importance of this document, it's not the place here to do it, I wish to state that recalling the UN Charter, the Declaration strongly reaffirms the entitlement of everyone to all human rights and freedoms enshrined in the Declaration, as well as the, I quote, the equal rights of men and women, unquote. An affirmation which, after more than 70 years, is far from being corroborated by the reality worldwide. Discriminations of many kinds are still present in the law and in practice, in many areas, and affect many societies, exposing women to abuses, exploitation, and violence. And in regard to violence, let me recall the famous general comment of the committee monitoring the Convention on the elimination of any form of discrimination against women, which clarified that violence is to be referred to any form of discrimination, so comes under the Convention on the elimination of discrimination against women. What about international humanitarian law? Its instruments do not contain distinction of any kind and are based on formal equality of men and women, so that a gender perspective was never considered as an outstanding issue. On one hand, gender violence, while still prevalent in many armed conflicts, did not appear to be widely addressed in traditional IHL training packages for the armed forces, and there could therefore be a perception that the issue had not been absorbed as a mainstream international humanitarian law subject. On the other hand, structural inequalities and gender stereotypes in society may entail the application of IHL rules in a way that is inherently discriminatory. And there is a need to clarify or further
we are going to discuss today has been drafted and published. So, and we are going to discuss this manual called Integrating Gender Perspectives into International Operations. I'd like to say that we're not only going to discuss the manual, but a broader spectrum of issues raised in the manual. And experts will support us here, experts who combine practical activities with research. Moreover, many of those present have been engaged in training personnel, in developing mandates for international operations, and have taken part in UN and other international organizations' missions. Please allow me to invite Professor Gabriella Venturini to speak.
Thank you very much to Dr. Victoria Manco, the director of the International and Comparative Law Research Center, and to Professor Tusu Manendorf, who has promoted this event. Also thanks to Professor Edoardo Greppi, who is the president of the International Institute of Humanitarian Law, and to Professor Pokar, who involved me in the project, in the Saremo project 3 years ago now. Thanks also to Eugenia and Igor for their help in the organizational matters. I also would thank the members of the advisory board of the WPS project, those of the drafting committee, and all officers of Italian, European, and African armed forces, police, civilians, international experts, and academics who participated in the 3 pilot workshops and in the experts meeting that were held in Sanremo in 2018 and 2019. All these people have contributed in a number of ways to the preparation of the handbook. Working with them was a real challenge for me, but one that has taught much and has given me a great reward as well. The handbook provides a practical framework for mainstreaming gender in the training of military, police officers, and civilians who are taking part or will prospectively be involved in international operations. Gender is a lens through which the distinctive situation of persons in the theater of a mission can be properly understood and better protected. Any action planned or undertaken during a mission has different impacts on men, women, girls, and boys. And those who bear in mind a gender perspective are more capable of adopting an appropriate behavior. So gender-sensitive training should be offered to all personnel involved in an international operation. And those in a command or in a leading position have a special responsibility in prompting their subordinates to develop gender awareness and to act accordingly. The next slide, please. The first chapter gives a basic definition of terms that are recurrently used throughout the handbook, such as international operations, mission personnel, sending state, host state, the status of mission personnel, as well as the law applicable to international operations. I just wanted to stress that the term international operation here is understood in the broad sense, including an array of military, civil, or police activities that differ from each other, both in terms of nature and aim pursued, but have in common the fact of being performed abroad by one or more states and or international organizations, individually or in cooperation. Next slide. Chapters 2 to 8 of the handbook have a consistent structure, each being divided into two parts. The first providing definitions related to the chapter subject matter, and where relevant, assessment of the applicable law of regulations. The second part sets forth guidelines addressed to trainers in the form of recommendations, each followed by one or more commentaries. What I should like to stress is that those definitions and guidelines do not belong to a specific national, regional, or international context, or cultural and political environment, nor do they intend to reflect the policy of certain states or organizations. They are based on universally shared values in furtherance of human rights and in the interest of the human dignity of persons. The general idea of gender mainstreaming is to adopt a gender perspective at all stages of an international operation and by all actors involved, political, military, police, and civilians. For such purpose, gender analysis is the key instrument to assess the current state of the gender situation in the local environment and to plan concrete actions to reach the objectives of the mission. An accurate gender analysis is a necessary prerequisite for any effective gender mainstreaming. For this reason, a guideline on how to conduct a proper gender analysis appears in each chapter with respect to its subject matter. We have identified a number of situations especially relevant to mainstreaming gender in international operations. They are sexual violence, trafficking in human beings, terrorism, detention, and peace processes. And I shall now briefly address each of these topics. Next slide, please. Sexual violence is a broad term, including sexual exploitation and abuse, SEA, and conflict-related sexual violence, CRSV. They are covered by two different chapters of the handbook. Although the acts that are referred to are often similar or even identical, the situations in which they happen are quite different. Sexual exploitation and abuse are perpetrated by the international or local personnel of an international operation against persons belonging to the host state. This dramatically undermines the trust in the mission and represents a shameful failure of the international community to offer protection to the local population. Tens of resolutions, documents, guidelines, and policies of the UN and the international organizations exist that are aimed at preventing and suppressing SEA. However, most regretfully, the situation does not appear to improve. Therefore, it is essential to insist on the need of properly training international and local personnel, both before and during the mission. Conflict-related sexual violence is committed by persons belonging to the parties to a conflict and affects civilians, again, women, men, girls, and boys, during hostilities or thereafter. It is widely documented in contemporary conflicts, and it severely increases the pain and suffering of war victims. Here, what is critical is the mandate of an international operation, which must include protection of civilians against CRSV. It is important that trainers transmit awareness that both SEA and CRSV are gendered because they affect differently women, men, girls, and boys, and have very different consequences on their life and on the life of their communities. Guidelines to prevent and combat SEA and CRSV include enforcement, individual responsibility, and compensation for victims as key issues for the success of any international operation. Next slide. A second situation relevant for gender mainstreaming is trafficking in human beings, THB. This is an appalling crime, but also a complex and elusive phenomenon that occurs worldwide and particularly in armed conflict and post-conflict situations. That is exactly where international operations are deployed. In the handbook, THB is defined in accordance with the protocol supplementing the United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime. Viewed in a gender perspective, trafficking includes crimes such as trade of persons for sexual exploitation that mainly affects women and girls, and for the purpose of forced labor, especially concerning men and boys, but also many other types, each of which requires special skills to be appropriately identified and suppressed. The handbook provides gender training guidelines and commentaries on how to prevent and oppose THB in the theater of an international operation. Next slide, please. A third situation covered by the handbook is terrorism. Acts of terrorism are a threat to international operations and seriously hamper restoration of peace and security in the host country. Contemporary practice shows how social roles and cultural dynamics affect acts of terrorism, and the gender dimension is important for identifying risks and raising awareness of the terrorist threat. Absent a universally shared definition, Chapter 6 of the Handbook assesses the common features of the crimes of terrorism covered by the existing treaties, as well as the prohibition of acts of terror aimed at terrorizing the civilian population under IHL and especially under the treaties. It is essential that the different roles of women in acts of terrorism are correctly appraised, because women may have different roles. They may be victims of terrorism, but also recruiters, enablers, perpetrators of terrorist acts. On the other hand, women play a crucial role in preventing and combating violent extremism in society, in the communities, in the families, and international operations must support their agency. Next slide, please. A further topic relevant for gender mainstreaming relates to situations of detention that are occurring more and more frequently in international operations. It is not necessary to describe how significantly gender impacts on the condition of persons deprived of liberty or having their liberty restricted. Chapter 7 of the Handbook provides guidelines on how to prevent and suppress gendered violations of rules and standards established by domestic and international law. It is based on international humanitarian law and on international human rights instruments that promote understanding of how gender affects conditions of detention and help raise awareness of risks due to societal and legislative contexts, time factors, policies, and practices of international operations. Last slide to conclude. We have considered that the purpose of today's international operations is not just to maintain or to restore peace and security, but also to facilitate peace processes, to support the organization of political elections, and to promote human rights. Research and quantitative studies demonstrate that women's participation in peace negotiations enhances chances for a durable peace in post-conflict societies. Thus, mainstreaming gender perspectives in international operations would not be effective without upholding and promoting the inclusion of women in these endeavors. Accordingly, Chapter 8 provides relevant training guidelines and commentaries, including case studies from different areas of the world. I covered this matter in the first online course on the application of the handbook launched last October by the Sanremo Institute, and I was able to appreciate the considerable amount of existing practice and the agency of international networks currently operating with a view to enhancing the role of women in conflict prevention, resolution and management, and in post-conflict situations. I hope this presentation has provided a general idea of the purpose and contents of the handbook, and I look forward to the discussion panel that will follow. Thank you very much for your attention, and I turn the floor back to Professor Tusmokhamedov.
Thank you, Gabriela. I recollect the time when I was involved in one of peacekeeping operations conducted by the UN, and women were involved as secretaries or staff assistants or military medical professionals. And as far as I understand, in modern days, women also act as in the leadership roles in comprehensive missions, multi-component missions. And as I've said, we have people with hands-on practical experience and academic backgrounds, and we have researchers with practical experience. And quite often people associate international operations as military operations, and they think in terms of international staff and international military observers. And this is actually how such multilateral operations were commenced. And we asked General Lieutenant retired Giorgio Battisti to share his experience. He's one of such people who occupied high-ranking positions in Somalia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Afghanistan. Giorgio, over to you.
So we start. Vizimiam dobry den. I hope I pronounced it very well. My good afternoon. So I will shortly speak about my deep experience in the international operation, where I have the chance to lead also women. Just in advance, I would like to say one thing, that peacekeeping operations are very different from combat operations. This is very important because within international operational, there are different kind of military activities. Said that, I will start that women joined the Italian armed forces in 2000, very early, only 20 years. It's very different from Red Army that, if I'm not wrong, had the entire women combat battalion during the Great Patriotic War. But it has been sufficient for commanders like me to have a good experience about women in uniform. Now women in the Italian army are currently about 80% of the total military forces. As far as the army is concerned, there are no restrictions on cover any role in the unit, including close combat position. The only limit is to pass the required training cycles. In 2003, while deployed to Afghanistan for the second time for the counter-terrorism operation Enduring Freedom, I commanded a contingent of 1,000 Alpini, that means mountain troops, including the first 5 women to serve in a real-world operation. They participated without any problem in the entire intense previous training cycle, sharing the same experiences and living conditions as their male colleagues, such as carrying heavy rucksack that it is typical for mountain troops, machine gun, and sleeping in the same tent or shelter. But at least initially, women's service in a complete male environment raised curiosity, stereotypes, and some cliché typical of Italian men, Latin men, because people serving in combat were always, in the normal idea, males. Males are traditionally the warriors. After this first experience in 2003, women took part at all Italian operations, domestic and abroad, without any limitation. Unfortunately, this also caused female losses in combat. women serving in operation highlighted some situations that, in my personal experience, required to be carefully evaluated, such as ability to live in difficult environmental context. Not always male accept to have women in leadership position. Ability to serve during combat situation without affecting the cohesion of the group. That's why possible different performance in a stressful situation. Whether or not the opponent respect women, I remember that women soldiers raped in the first Gulf War of 1991. More recently, there have been cases where women were the primary target of the opposing fire, because women as the main threat than male in my experience, and can be attacked behind the contact line. Cooperation with other multinational contingent is not easy due to different cultural and values. Then there is a risk of causing further losses due to the Western culture of prioritizing the rescue of women under fire as historical heritage. And then could be funny, but is a real, sometimes is a problem. Regulate sentimental relationship, which are difficult to avoid even with the strict controls among 20, 30 years old persons. This aspect does not mean being bigoted, but it can have effect on the cohesion and security of the unit. If women are roughly the 10% of a mission, only a small part of the male population might engage with them in a sentimental relationship. This may lead to favoritism, decrease attention to the threat, and even conflict between colleagues. In other words, this aspect requires clear rules and a firm discipline. During my deployment, my multi-deployment, I had to repatriate male and female personnel for incorrect conduct. Having said that, in my experience, female soldiers in operation have been an added value because they allow a commander to get in touch with the less visible and accessible part of the local population, that are women, local women. In some countries, due to their culture and religion, local women cannot speak with to foreigners. This is both for humanitarian aspect and above all for aspect related to security and get information for intelligence purpose. For this, the female engaged teams were created, as well as the US created human terrain teams with always female elements that were the most targeted by the terrorists. In closing, I emphasize one aspect, a very emotional, very important aspect. The strong media and emotional effect on the society, at least in Italian society, caused when a woman is injured or killed in action. So thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to answer any question. Spasiba za wnienie, more or less.
Thank you very much, Georgia. I'd like to highlight that our discussion has actually attracted interest of the Soldiers of the World organization and its Russian partner and international organization, Veterans of UN Peacekeeping Missions. I'd like to welcome Anatoly Isaenko, retired colonel who was a member of the first group of Soviet soldiers in 1973 who took part in the oldest UN mission, Truth Observation Mission. I'd like to also welcome Andrei Dimurenko, colonel retired, who was in Sarajevo during the UN operation in former Yugoslavia. Please allow me to hand over to Lilia Romadam, who is with the Russian embassy in Moldova and a member of the Russian delegation at the International Control Commission. I'd like to highlight that the mandate of the Commission is a ceasefire in the area, in the region. Lydia had her PhD thesis on international missions. Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well, dear Bakhtiyar, dear speakers, and the participants of our today's online meeting. I'm happy to greet you from the city of Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. First of all, please allow me to thank you for your invitation to take part in the presentation of this wonderful manual. The issue that the manual deals with is extremely relevant, and actually women's participation in peacekeeping operations continues to be on the radar screen of our agency. And actually, Vasily Nebenza, when he spoke at a meeting of the Security Council, highlighted the importance of engagement of women in prevention of armed conflicts and settlement of such conflicts. And he highlighted that that makes it possible to ensure more sustainable relations with the local population based on trust. And I should say that in general, the share of women in Russian peacekeeping forces is 17%. Analysis of trends related to gender awareness is extremely important and makes it possible to develop adequate approaches both at the level of separate states but at the level of the UN. And this manual will be useful not only to students and trainees and researchers, but for peacekeeping forces and international organizations. And I should say that the problem of engagement of women is not yet fully studied. And I became certain when I was reading for my PhD degree and when I studied the evolution of UN peacekeeping activities. I should say that the material in the manual is set out clearly and easy to understand. I should highlight the innovative aspects of the manual, its theoretical and practical significance. And I believe that Chapter 8 is of particular importance. The role or participation of women in peacekeeping operations. I should say that this particular chapter has a particular value related to case studies, and the geography of such cases is quite broad, which is an obvious advantage of this manual. I'd like to highlight specifically the Russian translation of the manual, I looked at the English original and the Russian version, and I think the Russian version is top notch. I'd like to thank the editors, the editorial board, the authors, the drafters of the manual, the translators, everyone who has contributed to the effort. Thank you. Thank you, Lilia. And you have highlighted this, you have added this research aspect to your speech. We understand that you cannot share all the details of your pretty sensitive mission in the commission you're working for at the moment. You have touched upon the translation, the Russian translation of the book. We'll go back to it later on. As a prelude to the next presentation, I'd like to highlight that when I joined the UN mission in Yugoslavia, Russian militia, they used to be called militia, now they are policemen, supported me a lot. They were members of the UN Civil Police International Group, and they generously shared the experience related to very subtle and sensitive points related to communication with the local population. And they also gave me some useful tips regarding mines. And I remember Dmitry Rostopin from Irkutsk, who taught a colleague from North America how to draft reports in English. And I also remember Boris Rakitin, who was a police colonel from Saratov, and he held a high post of a U.S. police officer in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And given the experience of Russian militia in the course of UN operations in former Yugoslavia, there was a special unit created at the All Russia Institute for Advanced Training with the Ministry of the Interior. And I'm happy to hand over to Inna Novichkova, PhD law, a police colonel, who will talk about the Institute. Dear colleagues, I represent the Ministry of the Interior. I'd like to share how we take part in training future peacekeepers. I'd like to say that actually peacekeeping is an indispensable instrument for creating conditions for conflict resolution across the world. The Russian Federation Ministry of Interior officers have been taking part in U.S. peacekeeping operations since 1992, elbow to elbow with our colleagues from different countries worldwide in the areas that may be called international conflict hotbeds. Throughout the years of the existence of the Peacekeepers Center, our institute has trained 2,000 Russian policemen and 600 foreign colleagues. We have several branches, and our center is located in the main branch, and quite often we are known as the Domodedovo Center. Domodedovo District Center. So one of our priorities is to train peacekeeping forces officers, and we have two stages to select the right candidates. The first step is screening, when we select candidates, and we need people who either speak English or French. So we test applicants, and then we before we admit them. Starting in 2008, we were certified by in 2008 we were certified by the UN Secretariat, and we now go through regular certification processes. We have received our recent certificate that we managed to obtain because of the change in the rules. Now certificates will be valid for 2 years. Every year, our institute trains about 180 peacekeepers, and they get trained, and we have training courses twice a year. And we may not have more than 90 people per course, 50 from Russia and 40 from Africa. The curriculum consists of 35 days, and our faculty has a significant experience in international operations, in peacekeeping missions, and a high academic potential to efficiently implement our training programs. Along with our faculty, we have invitees from Russian police with hands-on mission experience, and those who have pedagogical skills, teaching skills to communicate the learnings to our trainees. Speaking about the mandatory disciplines, first of all, the first is a foreign language. The second is related to political and legal aspects of peacekeeping activities, then moral and psychological training. Then we also train marksmanship, and there is also vehicle training. To perform well, we set up groups based on the language principle, either English language or French language groups. Usually we have we have mixed groups combined of our Russian and African colleagues, and that makes that gives an opportunity to communicate with native speakers. So we held workshops, roundtable discussions, brainstorming sessions, practical classes, and we trial solutions that we develop during brainstorming sessions in practice. I'd like to dwell on the final stage of our training programs. That is the SAAT certification exam. Based on our experience and based on our continuous search for improvement, we can say that we have achieved quite high results. 82% of our trainees have managed to pass this exam successfully, and we believe that it is evidence of our success. At the same time, I'd like to highlight a few problems. Up till now, we've been facing a problem when not all trainees are able to pass the final exam because, for instance, some of our African colleagues do not have driving licenses and they cannot pass the vehicle driving exam. And some of our African colleagues also come to us with insufficient language skills. Some of them speak German or Portuguese, and they struggle with the language. Given that the UN continues trying to engage more women in peacekeeping forces. In 2017, our center held a dedicated course for female policemen. And you can see this female-only course in this picture. This was the first ever female training course. And this was our practical contribution towards UN international programs based on inclusion of women in peacekeeping efforts. And dear colleagues, we'd like to use this opportunity to express our readiness to offer training courses to a broader audience of trainees. We understand that we cannot stop short, and currently we are working to arrange dedicated courses on such relevant topics as prevention of violence and crimes in specific communities, and a special course on police activities. And on my own behalf, on behalf of our institution, and on behalf of the Russian Ministry of the Interior, we'd like to express our gratitude for the invitation to take part in this event. I'd like to thank Inna Novichkova. As we've heard from Colonel Novichkova, in her pedagogical practice, she and her colleagues are paying a lot of attention on women's engagement in peacekeeping operations and on taken into account gender issues in international operations involving local communities. And I hope that the manual will come in useful and helpful to you, and you may be able to use this manual in your future work. Professor Venturini has already shared some insights. I'd like to listen to Edoardo Gemigliano, who, similar to Professor Venturini, has developed a special course on the basis of the manual. Edoardo, over to you.
So thank you very much, Professor Tuzmukhamedov. First of all, let me thank you all for this kind invitation. Obviously the center and Professor Poccar, Professor Venturini, and obviously the International Institute of Humanitarian Law for the opportunity to coordinate this very first special course. I have been asked to briefly outline the key factors that made this course successful. And obviously, as we all know, the actions and operations, as well explained by the other speakers, planned or undertaken in the conduct of international operations, can have different impacts on men, women, boys, and girls. And immediately after receiving the task of converting the handbook into a course, it became crystal clear to me how the very practical lessons of the handbook would become the cornerstone of that job. So the online course had to promote the implementation of the handbook among practitioners working in the field. And in other terms, it had to throw light on gender perspectives from a specialized angle, sometimes even overriding the basic concepts of IHL and IHRL to look at the operational side of the coin. So such an approach would provide a further practical step toward the fostering of effective respect of the existing IHL provisions on the gender-related issues. And for this reason, I worked on designing a training program focused on the needs of the field actors, not only military officers, but also civilian practitioners, law enforcement officers, UN and NGOs, professionals active in such operations. So 27 participants were thus selected, not only on the basis of the qualitative criteria of their CVs, but also on the basis of their working environment to maximize the impact of the training. In terms of contents, the course addressed the 7 areas of concern comprehensively analyzed already by the handbook, namely gender mainstreaming, sexual exploitation and abuse, conflict-related sexual violence, trafficking in human beings, smuggling of migrants, terrorism, detention, and women's engagement in peace processes. The sessions were conducted by highly qualified teaching staff team that was selected by the Institute, and among the drafting team and the advisory board of the handbook, its authors, and some of the IIHL fellows, teaching fellows. As a result, we had presenting Professor Pokar, Colonel Mark Dakers, the head of the IIHL military department, and then the course was enriched by other high-level speakers, among which I can highlight Professor Venturini and obviously Brigadier General Buzinge of the Ugandan Armed Forces, Colonel Durand from NATO, Captain Barron from the French Air Force, and some academics like Professor Piotrovic of the Aberystwyth University in the UK, and obviously IIHL teaching fellows like Major Fakaros and Davenport, both coming from the US JEG Corps. Of course, these different backgrounds of these experts certainly constitute an added value to the course, allowing the development of a hybrid and an integrated approach to the gender-related issues, ranging from the strict legal analysis to the study of the diplomatic involvement of women, historical development of gender mainstreaming in training, and so on. So very shortly, the course was structured into 8 chapters, split into 2 sessions each, that were basically, so it was an online course due to the COVID-19 related situation. So basically, we had this self-paced session that was made of a recorded lecture and some reading materials opted by the experts directly for the participants. And then we had a self-assessment tool to self-test the understanding on the topic. Then we had an interactive session with the experts, moderated by the coordinator of the course, so me. And we had an initial Q&A debate on the topic with the participants. And then obviously they were asked to submit some assignments that was a 1-page paper to address the case study that was proposed by the experts. So this scheme was repeatedly reproduced in all the thematic subcurricula, setting up a regular timetable of 3-4 days per session, and 2 live sessions per week. Obviously, most of them were professionals, so we had to structure the course over an entire month to allow all the participants to actually attend the live sessions. So the course was held under the Chatham House rules, obviously, as all the courses at the Institute. And the whole course tried to additionally build and foster a virtual version of the well-known Spirit of Sanremo that you probably know already, promoting a neutral and informal environment among the audience, but most of all, and encouraging participants not only to interact with the teaching staff, but also and particularly with their classmates. To quote Professor Pokar, as you can see in this slide, one of the most valuable aspects of the training in Sanremo is indeed the spirit of Sanremo and the exchange of practices among participants, resulting in a consolidation of long-lasting working connections among the IHL alumni. Far from being a mere networking opportunity, this distinctive aspect of the Sanremo experience is, on the contrary, instrumental to the IHL dissemination mission, and it enhances the harmonization of a common approach to IHL and its implementation, obviously, worldwide. So with this concept in mind, I can proudly confirm that the special course was successful in fulfilling this purpose. And to conclude, as my time has probably already expired, I would only like to stress the importance of the feedback submitted by the virtual class, at the end of every chapter, and finally at the end of the training program. So throughout the months, I encouraged the participants to spend a few minutes on feedback questionnaires, as they were not only an expression of appreciation or criticism of the sessions, but most importantly, they also provided the basis for an improvement of the course, so a second edition of this course. But I'm happy to say that the assessments and comments were very good overall, but I am even more grateful for the valuable suggestions and proposals for improvements we collected from the participants, ranging from new topics to be integrated into the course, or and to refining the training approach, for example, to some of the aspects dealt with by the course. So I shall end my intervention here. Thank you all again for your attention, and obviously looking forward to further debate.
I thank Eduardo Gimigliano. An integral component of any international process is the language we speak and use to communicate. With the absence of lingua franca, an international communication language available to all partners, translators and interpreters play an indispensable role. Unfortunately, the format of the manual is such that it does not mention experts who communicate critically important nuances of the text. And we tried to correct it, and we decided to ask Evgenia Neverova to share her insights related to the translation of the annual. She is a PhD in law, and she's a Master of Letters. I don't know whether she is a Master of Literature or in a broader sense, she is a Master of Humanities. Evgenia, over to you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to attend your event. As Professor Tuz Muhamedov has validly commented, translators are not often noticed, but maybe it is better for neutrality of the text. But on the other hand, I have something to say, because it was an exciting piece of work and exciting and honorable experience to translate the manual. As an international, as a lawyer specializing in international law by background, I know that every international lawyer must have heard about the Sanremo Institute manuals, even if that lawyer is not practicing international humanitarian law. And given that the manual has been developed and drafted for training purposes, to train peacekeepers and to train trainers, it was crucial to make sure that the manual is straightforward, clear, is not overloaded with terminology or abbreviations. Unfortunately, I did not always succeed in that, but I do hope that there were no major distortions. Given that I do not specialize in international humanitarian law, and I have never been involved in international operations, I try to rely on UN documents, mostly UN Secretary General presentations, and I also used Russian texts published on various websites of Russian branches of international organizations such as Red Cross and other organizations. In terms of challenges, I'd like to highlight three general ones. The first one is related to the fact that there are very few official translations into Russian, even on the UN website, even when we do not take into account translations of Secretary General reports. Other documents are either not translated into Russian or provide an overview in Russian describing the terms of reference of a particular department. As to something useful for accurate translation of terms or names of organizations. Unfortunately, I was not able to find all of them. And in this connection, I'd like to express my hope that I did not distort the names of those organizations and translators, professional translators will be able to understand which particular term was meant or which particular organization was meant in the original. Another thing that I faced when translating the manual was the following. Given that it was an assignment of very high responsibility, and given that the gender perspective is not much studied in the Russian language international law literature, it was crucial not to mistranslate some broader concepts dealt with in the manual. First of all, it is the gender perspectives concept. In English, we see the word gender perspectives in the title of the manual. And I received some help from Professor to Muhamedov, who suggested gender problems or gender problematics, whereas the English word perspectives does not always involve problems, though for experts, for academicals, or for those who are working as teachers, they do not consider problems or problematics as something that relates to problems only. Whereas it was crucial to make sure that the text of the manual, the Russian text of the manual, highlighted the principal focus of the manual, that the principal focus of the manual was taken into account gender perspectives, the gender factor, because in the manual we can read that gender perspectives can be used to take into account the capabilities of those who seem to be invisible in international operations. And actually, in this case, it is not a problem, it is an advantage that women should be engaged and should be involved in peace processes for a long-lasting and enduring peace. And another challenge was related to the word mainstreaming. It is intuitively clear in the English language. It is something that becomes a mainstream, something that is universally acknowledged and understood by everyone. For a Russian-speaking person, a cliche from the English language is not commonly used, and we decided to when we were discussing the terminology, we decided to use the expression an all-sided awareness or taken into account of gender issues in all processes. And I do hope that this rephrasing of the word mainstreaming proved to be successful, and I hope that it expresses the author's intent to make sure that gender is considered across all aspects, and gender should not be considered as something redundant or something additional that has to be considered in extraordinary circumstances when planning or conducting international operations. But gender awareness should be something that should be ever present and should be kept in and should be kept on the radar screen, and everyone should be mindful of that. Thank you. Thank you, Evgenia. I did not hear any answer to my question. Master of Letters, are you a Master of Humanities or Master of Literature? Literature, okay. I'd like to say right away that given the questions that we are already receiving in the chat box, there is a question about certain subtle military terms, and I think that it might be very useful in your future work. And this question is asked by Anatoly Isaenko. It is not a question, but a comment, I should say. I have to say that Anatoly Isaenko has a classical linguistic background. He is a military interpreter. He graduated from the Military Institute of Foreign Languages that is currently part of the military institutes. And he actually criticizes your translation of the phrase that subordinates should be asked to comply when legal or disciplinary actions should be taken. You translated the phrase "lest commanders" is translated at the threat of punishment, but he says that in the Italian version of the manual, the word fear or threat is not present, and this is an idea of being aware of one's duty. There is also a comment or a request. How can the Foreign Literature Library, as one of major Russian collections of foreign language literature, can get access to a copy of this manual? Actually, I think the library is talking about this manual in different languages. I think Eduardo is positioned to be is well positioned and may be able to provide copies of this manual so that we could share them with the Foreign Literature Library. And as far as I understand, the library of the Diplomatic Academy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also expressed an interest in getting access to this manual. Questions. There was an answer to the first question given in the course of our discussion. Maybe you will elaborate on it. Why did you have this idea to write this manual? Gabriela, I think it is a question to you.
Probably better to Professor Pokar. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Should be posed to Professor Pokar, but of course I know how to answer. It was the International Institute of Humanitarian Law, the Sanremo Institute, applied for funding to the Foreign Ministry, Italian Foreign Ministry, in the framework of the third national program in implementation of the UN resolution 1325. Okay, and so the project that Professor Pokar and the Institute at the time drafted exactly planned to have 3 workshops, 1 experts meeting, and then to draft a manual on training, a manual directed to trainers who train persons who are involved or will be involved in international operations. So the idea was the Professor Pokar's idea, indeed. But the input was the Italian Foreign Ministry. Did I correctly answer?
I hope that you did. This was an anonymous question. I hope that the answer has been satisfactory. But there were additional questions. How did you select the authors and how long did it take you to write the manual?
Okay. Well, the advisory board, the members of the advisory board were selected by the council of the Sanremo Institute, and they were selected on the basis of the project, which established to have European and African participants, basically. And then the advisory board selected the drafters, taking into consideration different regional persons belonging to different regional systems. So we had Europeans and African and NATO and academics and military and so on. I was not a member of the advisory board nor of the drafting committee. I simply facilitated the discussions and the work. And if I may say one thing, I listened with great interest the intervention of Mrs. Neverova. I know very well the difficulties of translating from English. The original version is English, but I worked very much with the Italian translators, and we had a very difficult time in translating into Italian some English terms. That's all. Oh, how long did it take? Well, basically 1 year, 2 years of planning and having pilot workshops, and little by little the manual took shape, and then the last year was finalized.
Thank you. A question to General Lieutenant Battisti. If 40 years ago, when you were a lieutenant, not lieutenant general, and if you embarked on an international coalition operation, would you agree to report to a female general?
This is a very good question, because lieutenants normally are very creative officers, and at that time I was a lieutenant in an Italian unit that was working within NATO environment against Soviet, our dear enemy Soviets at that time. So I have the opportunity to work with some women soldiers coming from the Northern European countries or the United States. Frankly, I was lieutenant. It was not easy for an Italian officer that didn't have at the time any contact with women in uniform to receive order from a female at that time. Now is completely different. When I was in Afghanistan last time in 2013 and 2014, there were also some colleagues, female colleagues coming from the United States Army. So it's completely different. Now, our lieutenant are completely lieutenant and junior captain are completely different because they grew up from the academy to other military courses all together. So now there is no problem. There is no difference, and there is the maximum respect to each other. Personally, as I said, 40 years ago, could have been some problems, temporary, some problems.
Thank you, Giorgio. A question to Colonel Novichkova. What are the operations in which female officers take part, and do they act as commanders or leaders in such missions? You need to unmute your microphone. Thank you very much for the question. Today, as far as I know, our women soldiers take part in are taking part in such missions as the mission in Congo, and there are commanders, and there is a pretty big female mission in Cyprus, and this mission has about 5 women from the Ministry of the Interior, from the Russian Ministry of the Interior, and they report to a man, I have to admit, but they play an important role there. So these are the 2 missions in which our women are involved. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to add to the above that my old and close friend, who was an ambassador to Venezuela, and he was also a Haiti and Dominican ambassador. And once he was in Haiti with one of UN missions, and he was approached by an police officer from the Ministry of the Interior, a Russian lady, and she held one of leadership roles there. So we have our women in uniform serving in different countries. I hope they are good as service women. And then perhaps there is another question. Do you believe that having studied this manual during a training program, military men engaged in special purpose operations would look more carefully at gender matters during such operations compared to day-to-day lives, compared to what they do every day? Perhaps this is a question to Gabriela or Inna Novichkova or Giorgio. Who would like to answer this question? Well, let me try to start answering this question. I believe that there is little literature we can refer to, literature that may help us to prepare officers to take part in such missions. Therefore, this manual would be extremely useful to us. We've studied this manual in detail and we discussed it at length. And therefore, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to get access to the English and Russian versions when we needed to look at the original phrases. And we'll surely highlight some of the chapters, some of the provisions or sections from this manual. And trainees who attend training courses at our centers often ask for additional literature, additional recommendations. And I think this manual would be also extremely useful in this respect. Thank you. Thank you. I think Eduardo Gemiliano needs to put the Center for Advanced Training of Russian of Interior officers on your mailing list. I understand that Igor has asked this question, and I can see the list of the attendees, and I can see only one Igor, who is a military retiree. Would someone else like to comment or give an answer to the question about whether such officers would pay more attention to gender issues when taking part in international operations compared to how much attention they pay to gender perspectives in their day-to-day lives? Will they pay more attention to this? Gabriela, your
well,
microphone.
It depends on how much attention do they pay to gender issues in their normal life. I think that everyone, all of us, should pay more attention to gender issues. And this does not mean to consider only women, because gender is not only about women. Gender is about men, women, boys and girls, the relationship among these people, the different way these people understands things. And I think we all should better consider when we say something or when we do something, how we act, how the recipients will consider our action, words, thoughts, depending on whether they are men, women, girls, and boys. If I say one thing to a man, he will probably receive this sentence in a different way compared to a woman or to a boy, to a juvenile, to a girl. And so we should all pay more attention to this. And I hope that the manual will be useful in this perspective.
Eduardo, just 1,000 copies more. Eduardo, over to you.
Okay, so it's funny because we actually asked the participants to the course this same question. So do you think you will have the opportunity to apply the knowledge, obviously in the overall feedback to the course? And the response was definitely. The average response was definitely. We will apply this knowledge and we will apply these provisions and we will take care of training other persons, other colleagues to do so. And also, if I may, I can just redirect who asked about the handbook, the document. It is in all the languages. It is available on the IIHL website, so iihl.org. So it's free, and you can get access to it in all the languages in which it is available.
Thank you. I can see that Giorgio Battisti, our student, is raising his hand.
Yes, thank you. Just one thing regarding if we have to pay more attention during normal life or during combat or military operation. In my opinion, but not only in my opinion, every one of us that has or have been at the official position has to pay the maximum attention every day. But in international or multinational environment, we have to pay more and more attention because a misconduct of one officer or NCOs or soldiers with a foreign girl or foreign man can become an international incident. I have to face twice, at least twice, in Afghanistan, and the problem reach the government level in the both cases. So it's very important because at the end of the day, in this situation, is a matter of national behavior, national imaging across the world. So in international environment, I believe that we have to pay more and more attention. That's why this manual is very suitable, because can provide the basis for training, cultural, military, professional, also mental training for soldiers before departing for operation. Over.
Thank you, Giorgio. And perhaps my final question, do you plan to continue your project? Or maybe, well, do you plan to continue or maybe publish the second volume of this manual, or maybe a supplemented manual or amended, updated manual? Gabriella, I guess it is a question to you.
Well, this is a question that should be put to the Italian Foreign Ministry if it is going to fund more projects. But definitely, I think the Sanremo Institute will continue to offer courses. And yes, if funds will be available, you know that the situation is difficult now for various reasons, especially for the COVID pandemic. But if it will be possible to supplement, to continue to improve the manual on the basis of its application, certainly the Institute and myself will be happy to go on with this endeavor.
Thank you, Gabriella. I think that as a result of our workshop, our meeting, you have managed to get acquainted with potential future drafters, and you have your translator, written translator. And to close this meeting, I'd like to, first of all, thank all the participants, everyone who has presented, everyone who has spoken, offered comments, feedback, asked questions, or everyone who's been in this virtual conference room. For you, I'd like to thank all of you for your knowledge, expertise, your time, and I'd like to present our speakers for the expertise they have shared. And I hope that this will be a next step in our cooperation between the International Center for Comparative and for International and Comparative Law Research and the International Institute of Humanitarian Law. Believe me, two partner organizations can learn how to be, can teach everyone else how to be hospitable. And now take care of yourself and your families, and see you soon. Thank you.